Good morning, and welcome back to Art Stream with Trey Gallaher. This is continuing on with a design I started last episode, where I was working on a skeleton of a cat-like creature here, kind of borrowing from shared anatomy from different cats with the intention that I would use this as a base to work with a creature design over the top. So this is sort of first step of studying that skeleton and getting to know it a little bit better. And I thought I would dive right into existing body shape, but I'm thinking that for this second episode on this topic that I would maybe step back and do a little bit of a head study, realizing I'm not feeling 100% comfortable with the head shape of a cat, the skeletal shapes that are there. Again, most of what I draw is humans and human-related skulls, and I'm realizing there's a few more shapes in there that I'm a little less familiar with. So before I really decide what I want to do with a head shape on a creature design, I want to know what the head shape is on an animal of this nature. Even if I decide to change it, and I most likely will, I want to be able to feel like I know what I'm doing. So looking at what I have, I've decided I'm going to step aside and do a little bit of a drawing just on the head first. And I'm thinking I'm going to do maybe 1 or 2 angles on the head, maybe 3. Maybe I'll do a front, side, and 3/4, and first looking at those shapes and then deciding what I want to change later. Again, using this technique and starting with a base skeleton as a learning place is a great way to really thoroughly understand the design of something new that you are going to create. So, all right, a couple pieces of information that I did find out last time, and that is that there are actually 7 cervical vertebrae in most cats and 13 ribs, but 12 actual thoracic vertebrae. So, and indeed 7 lumbar. And then we get into the sacrum back here. So that just sort of answered a couple of those questions along the way that I had realized I didn't know. So looking now at my ribs and the shape of the rib cage, I realize there's a little bit more to it. Okay, well, I'm going to step aside. I'm actually going to pull this drawing off. I'm going to set that aside for now and come back to that one. And what I'm going to do now is a little bit more of a head study of a skull. And again, I've got numerous references here around me. This is one of the great things about the internet and, of course, books. I still have some great books on animals. But you've got a reference library that you can study from. And even though you end up designing something of your own, it's a good place to start. And so I am going to work a little bit with the skull shapes to make sure I understand what the anatomy is doing there fully. So I'm going to start off with the more of the front view first. And again, this is something I would work over the top to change a little bit. So I think this first one and then looking at it from the side, I think I'm going to do something that ends up being Sometimes it helps to pull out a straight edge if you got one, just to help you keep the sort of proportional alignment. A little bit of a more accurate angle here. All right, I'm going to do a couple of basic axis lines to give me something to work with. In general circular shapes, I am kind of looking at something very general that isn't an exact replica of a skull in my references, but more like building off a similar variation. So it's okay if there's little bits of differences, but mostly to help me figure out where certain pieces of information need to fall. So kind of looking at this, first division would be sort of top half of the skull from the lower. From the lower jaw, so we sort of have the maxilla. Here. Very complex set of bones, but same basic structures. We're going to have looks like the eye structure and the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity appears to be quite large, so I think we're looking at something that's going to give us quite a larger size nasal cavity here, somewhat of a heart shape. Starting from the front view, I'll get probably most of these things blocked in. Careful shapes. Now, most of these kinds of cats seem to be built around pretty strong, sizable canines, which are at the base of the nasal cavity. Slightly inward. And then, of course, the lower jaw is going to extend below. Again, I'm okay with making changes along the way, as the idea is to find something new of my own. But I am looking at basic counts, number of teeth, overall structures. Appears to be a little bit more of a flattening in the cranium. And then what seems to be pretty impressive about most of the skulls on canines and similar skulls of other animals of this nature, these quadrupeds, carnivores, is the size of the zygomatic, which appears to be quite large and actually wraps considerably far out here in relation to let's just keep an eye on a few lines here. I'm going to bring these straight across just to give me some zone location. Nasal passage. I'm going to try to maybe locate the top of the teeth. Oop. Bottom of the teeth. And location to the front. So let's see, I'm going to start with the nasal passage here. Looks like there's quite a bit of slope in most of the skulls I'm looking at that kind of slope this way, and then they kind of slope this way. Down to the nose, sort of at the apex of the teeth, and then they kind of curve back. What you can't see, which is not so easy to tell, is that the bridge of the nose is sort of coming up here and creating a little bit of this eye socket. The nose, the zygomatic, sort of cutting through here, and then a strong curvature around the front. These bones are really not easy to see what's going on. So back of the head, what you can't really tell from this angle is how much there's a taper. So we're sort of reaching the front. Downward sloping of the teeth, the chin sort of coming back, and then this running back up underneath here, and then the jaw tucking in behind the eyes. So the zygomatica is sort of cutting back here. We're going to the big teeth, canines. This kind of cuts back in. Then there's that curvature here into the zygomatica, which comes back pretty far and sort of has a curved piece. So curved here, perhaps up around the side of the eye. That must be into the zygomatic arch. And sort of curves back this way. So loops around the eye a little bit. Curves up into the socket. And then it sort of has a little bit more of this curve. Back underneath. And again, you just got to learn the stuff. You just got to kind of get your brain to wrap your head around what these shapes are doing. We know these human ones so well. We draw so many humans and so many creatures that are built off humanoid shapes, but you realize that when it comes to other skull shapes, that if you don't do them very much, you haven't spent a lifetime looking at them every day, that you don't have as much of an understanding of them. So it looks like underneath here, we curve back up where the jaws is sort of hinging just behind the eye. So it sort of comes down here. This is the mandible, which looks like it comes pretty wide, and then comes down to the lower jaw. So coming from that shape, we have sort of lower teeth, and then of course with some teeth in here. Okay, a little bit of room for flexibility, as I'm not doing exact replication of a real cat, but enough to where I can kind of see what's going on and get some of the same basic shapes. I'm sure paleontologists and people that would study bones could probably tell me a lot more information. But again, I'm only using this as a visual design element, so I'm okay with the idea that mine is not going to be 100% accurate. But I did want to have some of those structures in place so that I at least have some understanding of where I'm at. Okay, lower jaw. Teeth, probably some molars back here. For more grinding. Nasal passage. Maxilla. Cranium, frontal bone, zygomatic, mandible hinging underneath, occipital, all right, let me work back on my front view a little bit. And I think sometimes this is what you have to do for your brain to really get it, is you have to kind of go back and forth. So back to my front view. And I think one of the first things I'm noticing here is I went maybe a little large. A little far down on my nasal passage. Although usually most cats are pretty good runners and pretty good sprinters, so a lot of air intake there for sure. Of course, the eye coming up, we have the sort of zygomatic arch wrapping around the side of the head, which is a little different shape than the humans. Sort of up and back. using my basic structure. Maybe a little less intense on the headpiece is sort of cutting back in. And that disappears behind there. So this is mostly kind of open from the front view. This could be one ugly beast, but that's a little bit of the idea. A bit of a cutback that you can't really indicate very well. Back here is how narrow this gets. Zygomatica is pretty wide out to the side here, but this is all sort of tapering back this direction, and you can't really tell. I'm looking at some skulls that are showing me top view, and in a lot of animals like this that have a long snout, how tapered off the occipital is in the back, but you just kind of can't see how much it's tapering. It's very thin, so there's really not much that flushes out this area. It's pretty much, this is where the ear holes would be. They'd be sort of coming up in this direction. Giving you some idea. Where those might flush out around the head. Later on, it would be very useful to do a very detailed study of a skull of various animals. I think the more skulls that you draw, I think the more you'd have the ability to alter and tweak your ideas. It's been a while since I've drawn a lot of skulls that weren't more human oriented, so again, I'm a little rusty, but again, that's part of the reason I'm doing this, just to familiarize myself again with it. So it definitely seems like around these canines, that's where the beginning of the sort of undercut portion of the maxilla cuts behind. Happens is right behind the canines. big ears, actually. Gives you some idea of where these ears would be. And these teeth, a little bit smaller teeth here on the bottom. But also with the lower set down below here. So my lower jaw back here kind of winding in, dropping down. Looking positively scary now as I start to see this jawline, the power of this jawline starting to come into play here. It's also got some element of a dog-like structure kind of coming back in here. I'm also realizing that maybe my teeth could be a little closer together. You realize there's so much anatomy here and skeletal structures which fit together like a puzzle, and we're sort of reverse engineering it right now, which is to work it backwards, build my own shape. But maybe, partially through accidents, happy accidents, a structure starts to take place, anatomy starts to fall into place as I get the major structures there, and then of course I am creating a little bit of these structures of my own. So something new starts to take place from the ground up. What would this thing look like from the ground up? And again, I'm a little less concerned that I have all the actual anatomy pieces absolutely perfect, but at least I've got some structures in the right place, and this helps me kind of see it. A little bit of these sort of nasal bone passages. Open here, some of these are bones sort of tucking back up underneath. Very dog-like. I want something a little more cat-like, so I got to figure out where I'm not hitting that right. Let's have a little bit more of that rounded ear. All right. Jaw cuts through. Jaw cuts through. And that's behind. Excuse me. Excuse me again. A little bit shorter on these lower teeth here. Lower jaw in a little tighter. There we go. That brought it back to being a little more cat-like, realizing there's a sort of a shorter front end on that chin. Okay, I think it's cleanup time. It's now time to start making this a little bit clearer, eliminating the things that I'm not going to keep, making sure that proportionally I've got some alignment. I'm thinking that at some point when I actually begin to do some of the concepting, sketching around the outside, that I will probably use this as sort of a workover and begin to find my shapes based upon some of these skull shapes that are here. So having this sort of in place definitely helps. And you know, you might say, well, couldn't you just take some pictures of skulls and work over that? And I suppose that you could, but to really understand the dimensional quality of something, this is what drawing does so well for you, is it's your brain's translation of the 3D. And somewhere in there, when you're making that translation, your brain gets it better. And I think that if you were to work over purely photographic information and you're creating something new, one, you'd be too tied to the photographic information for something that is going to be a new creation, and your brain wouldn't necessarily understand the 3D aspect of it so well. So I think there is value in your brain kind of going through some of this and trying to understand the nature of this form. Then, if you can want to be able to draw it from any angle, your brain will know what should be there and have a better sense for it. So you'd be able to do a better job of sketching it and drawing it from differing angles. Having had to force your brain to wrap itself around that dimensional quality. This is what drawing does. Drawing is the translation of observing something in life from 3D and putting it down to a surface in 2D. And even if the goal is to go back to 3D, your brain works extra hard to do this. But in the end, you learn something. And your brain sort of inherently builds in a language so that if it has to recapture it, the map is built in, burned in. So it's a little slow, but in the long run, I think the payoff is definitely worth it. Fixing some of my teeth here. Bringing them back in. It might be fun to make them longer, but for now I'm going to make my base the base of my skull be a little bit within the mouth. I don't want teeth hanging out of my mouth. One of these is part of the maxilla. The other is the mandible behind it. So same thing on the other side. Okay. In here and clean up a little bit of these edges. Make sure those upper teeth stay within the jaw, and then of course my seems to be a little gap. It's kind of interesting, little detail. There seems to be kind of a gap between the upper canines and the sort of lower canines, where the teeth adjacent to the canine leave a little gap for the lower tooth. So there's a little bit of a space, so that as those sort of teeth come together, that there's perfect alignment. I guess you'd say that they're bite alignment. But given that they have such large teeth in here, there does seem to be a little gap right there where the lower tooth falls right in. So I'm going to plan for that just a little bit. Lots of chewing, biting. Teeth are a little bit space there. Maybe sort of some chipped teeth, scavengers. Of course, more of our molars and things in the back, but mostly out of sight by this point. All right, so need to come down a little bit here. Of course, our descent here. And I'm getting the feeling that that is probably not wide enough as a lower jaw. But for now, maybe I can come out a little wider. Lots of little corrections. Maybe more detail than I need, but I'd rather do it now than later. Aligning itself there, coming behind, coming down in the front. Not too big of fierce teeth here, so that might be something that I'll change a little bit more later. better, shaping up. Just keeping an eye on location. The jaw would come down like that. Looks pretty good. Taper off a little bit here. Back of the skull there. Rounding some things off. Keep in mind that's just some ear reference location, not really something I'm probably gonna do on this actual drawing, but just for reference. Got some bones, cleaning up these edges. In this respect, we are like sculpting, and sculpting is a powerful skill to be able to help your brain understand three-dimensional information. I don't often get the chance to do sculpture in what I do, but I have many friends that do sculpture, and the amount of time that they take to take all this information and put it into 3 dimensions, it's incredible. Incredible. Much slower process, but with more knowledge. So I have so much respect for that. And of course, as we move into the digital age, and we are using 3-dimensional models, even better that your brain can translate from real 3D to a simulated 3D. Your brain's going to have to do that eventually. If you sculpt in, say, a ZBrush or a Maya, you're going to have to figure out all those 3D qualities. As an illustrator and a concept artist, I'm usually not spending as much time to be able to really generate something of that magnitude and detail. That's usually something handed off to others who will model that information, but it's based upon idea and concepts that we're exploring here. So enough information for me to be able to be creative, but not enough to not allow me to produce multiples. In favor of the one finished, it's more about multiples. And that's what I plan to do with this. I've got a base skull here that I'm working with, and I'm helping my brain understand what the shapes are. But once I get this in place, I will be able to do multiples over the top without having to spend so much time changing all of those exact shapes right away. So a little bit of investment research here, but in the end it will allow me to do a lot of exploration, which is really more what your designer and your concept artist and your illustrator are after, is exploration, not mastering. Okay. I imagine some of these things will change as I move forward. may decide to bump things, move things over, and as I do variations over the top of this thing, of course, they may require changes to the skull, but I needed a base. So this is what I'm going with here for the moment. Maybe it will be the job of a sculptor or a 3D modeler to have to come back in and translate what I change back into a more practical skull. But for the purposes of being able to just freely design, it's a little bit more open-ended. All right. Well, we're in about an hour, and worth a little bit of research, worth a little bit of knowledge to understand what you're looking at and to figure out something that feels and comes from more representation from real life. Most likely we'll have a greater yield in the end. Come back out just a little farther. Clean up some of the outside edges, some of the fingerprints. I'm going to keep my ears there just for reference, even if I decide to change them a little bit. Reminds me where the protrusions are coming from, where the ear canal is going to start. Not going to shade this thing too much. I was thinking I might add just a touch of shadow just to remind myself where the overlaps are, just to help my brain see it a little bit more. I don't want anything that's going to create too much tone, but the overlaps is what could use sometimes a little bit of emphasis. By the way, I'm just working an HB graphite pencil here. Nothing big. Sometimes I work in 2H for the more technical perspective related lines where I have a lot of straight drafted lines. But for general sketching, when I start out, it could be anywhere from like H to HB to B. I don't go much darker than that in the beginning, mostly because I don't want to get too much buildup of graphite on the surface and it just gets a little messy and get your hand all full of graphite. And until I know what's going down, I need to stay light enough that I could kind of erase and correct and that kind of thing. So I think what I might do is just throw down a little bit of tone, just in the areas where I know there's going to be heavy overlap. Use a little bit of my pencil sharpener, which I don't often use, but I want a little bit of a finer line. You can't see what I'm doing here. You're pretty basic drafting pencil sharpener. Just gonna put little bits of tone here. Same direction, very uniform. No back and forth, just mostly straight directional lines. See, maybe a little bit behind the zygomatic hair. Very straight, mechanically applied. Drawing from the shoulder rather than from the wrist. You'll see that I'm not moving my wrist at all here. You pull from the shoulder, you get a much straighter line over distance. A little bit of dimension there. Some molars back here, but I'm not really going to spend a bunch of time rendering those. I think most of this kind of stuff is going to be in shadow. I'll probably put a little bit of shadow here from the zygomatic bone coming in over the top. And I think this must be the zygomatic arch right here, and it looks like it doesn't even completely attached to the skull itself over on this side, but this is tapering quite a bit back here, so a little bit of indication of dimension through the shadow would work over there. Bit of shadow, what would be underneath. And this kind of takes two cutbacks, by the way. It kind of gets narrower in two places. So maybe a little bit of This is one piece, by the way, that tucks back under, so the thing that's kind of tricky is how that rolls. And I'm giving it a little bit of a hard line, and maybe I could soften this line a little bit just to know that it's not the edge of the bone, it's just the curvature of a bone. That's what's interesting about the zygomatic and into the maxilla. And the maxilla you'd have sort of down here, is that it's really two bones fusing together. But darker back underneath here. Well, probably a lot of subtle plane changes in there that a real skull would probably have, but this at least gives me some proportions to work with. Width, height. And the nice part about this too, if spending some time in building a skull shape like this underneath, and in some ways making it your own, and you can always keep this as reference and pull it back out and sketch back over the top and alter it and change it, but you have a base that you have on record of your own sort of basic shapes, and you can keep working on over the top. I'm going to put a little bit of space under here. I think my goal that I'm going to do once I finish this last little bit of touches on here is to go back to the head I had put on my original full body skeleton and correct it a little bit. I had really just blocked something very simple in on that one, but this one, being a larger, more detailed drawing, definitely filled in some gaps for me, so I feel a little bit more sure of where things need to be. A little bit of a gap here. It's okay that some of the symmetry is off. No skull is perfect. All kinds of unique nuances. Again, I'm going to start back with some shading back inside the nasal passage here. The idea that things are getting a little shallower as they come towards the front. Remembering that a dark line really represents two edges coming together, two forms coming together, maybe a directional change. So it's important to remember that this is really form we're talking about, and form is defined by light and shadow, not by a line. But sometimes we need that line to help tell us where to stop shading, or where to stop where there is a form change more crisply. And sometimes there's for design purposes, and sometimes there's for drawing over the top purposes, and so we'll make our edges a little bit cleaner. Sometimes it's more for stylization, comic booking, cartooning. We take anatomy and we solidify it in a line. But really, it's all light and shadow, and it's all form and the realistic side of things, and the real life three-dimensional qualities. It's not a line-driven thing, but sometimes we use line to emphasis, to clarify, to make a statement, maybe be more expressive. All right. I'm a little different on my eyes here, but maybe a little lower. By the way, those of you that might be wondering, when am I going to be doing a regular broadcast here, so that maybe more of you can tune in. I appreciate the fact that I've been kind of inconsistent about my broadcasting and my streaming, but that's mostly because my life has been very inconsistent recently, and maybe getting a little more inconsistent here in the near future, so I can't say that I can nail something down. I generally am going to be out here closer to the weekends versus during the week. For me, during the week, I'm a teacher, so I am frequently doing classwork and catching up on classwork and grading and all the things that go along with being part of an art school. But I'm trying to reserve this time for myself and to stream on the weekends. So I can say that somewhere between, I'm usually not teaching on Fridays, and sometimes I'm not teaching on Mondays, and I'm definitely usually not teaching over the weekend. So sometime around Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whether it's later at night, I have a young son, so I'm frequently having to try to get him to bed, and that's not easy and takes time. And I usually try to do this when the house is a little bit more quiet and I don't have him running in. Although I love his art and I love watching him make art. But I try to do this when things are a little bit quieter. So late at night, early in the morning, sometime Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But I'll try to get something nailed down when I can give a definitive time, because I'd like for people to be able to catch this live instead of in the recorded version, which I realize a lot of you are probably catching this in the recorded version, which is fine. I mean, it doesn't change. But if it matters to you to see it in the live, it might be nice to know. But I just am not finding a consistent time yet. I'm realizing there's probably a lot of little plane changes in here. 3/4 view would probably help, but at this point I don't think I'm going to do a 3/4 view, maybe, but I think this has gone far enough for me today. Maybe I'll do one, if not on a stream, and then bring it back in. But my goal was to do an overall sort of creature concept, so maybe I'll come back and work on a head a little bit later, but I think I want to go back to the body a little bit after this and make a corrections to that skull, and then I can start more loosely sketching over the top. Suggestion of where some ears might be. you're just joining, it's early in the morning this time. The last one I did was kind of late. This time I decided I'd do this one a little bit earlier in the morning. It's always a toss-up, but it's usually again around bedtime for my son. All right, not bad. Not bad at all. I think I'm getting the feel for this. At least enough to know where my shapes are at. And maybe I can work on a 3/4 drawing at another time. Couple of alignments. And that one's a little bit off. See if I can fix this one. Not a perfect alignment, but I'm actually okay with that as long as I'm in the ballpark. I think it's okay. It's just a visual acuity here. Visual cue. Again, these were used a little bit more in the beginning for alignments left to right, not so essential that they're perfect now. This being the frontal bone, coming back over the top just a little bit. Cutting back in and sort of All right. I think that takes care of this head study of a feline of some sort, not exact real life, but close, with a lot of similar structures and basic anatomy in there. And again, the purpose of this one was to help me as I'm moving forward in designing a creature from the skeleton, or from a skeletal start, and adapting from real life references to a little bit of your own. Just to continue from the previous stream before this, I'm going to go ahead and take this one off and bring back a little bit of where I was on the previous drawing, which was I was working with looking at some, again, big cat skeletal structures and putting together a little bit of my own from it, and realizing that I wanted to work on my skull a little bit. So this is having now stepped aside and worked a little bit on perfecting my skull. I now know what I can do a little bit here to make this perhaps look a little bit more the way I wanted to. I've also got this creature looking at us straight on, and now that I'm thinking about drawing this, I think 3/4 view on the head is probably a little bit better than just straight on. Give it a little bit more of a sense of dimension. So actually, I think I'm going to lighten this and work back in with a little bit more of a 3-dimensional 3/4 view turn. So again, just so you know, I've got my references over here, and I'm going to come back in and work on this skull just a little bit. Getting a low battery, so I'm going to plug in here. All right. Take a little sip of coffee here. Not many of you out there this morning at this hour. It's tough to be a streamer when you're a dad with a young kid. Got to find really challenging hours to stream. All right. So yeah, keeping my reference, nearby, and having now thought about a lot of the things that go into a skull and its basic proportions, I'm now ready to kind of put that skull that I played around with on this creature. And again, all of this is in flux, because as I begin to design over the top of the skeleton, I may make changes. But this is just to get myself some basic anatomy and some familiarity with the structures. So I am going to come back in here and start by changing the direction. I'm starting with sort of an oval shape, 3/4 view, and much like starting human heads and skulls, one of the first things that we do in anatomy is we find the center. So finding some axis lines, bilateral axis lines, helps us to understand the dimension of the thing that we're looking at. Even as we customize the shapes, you got to find the center line. And then, of course, trying to understand where the rest of the structures are, and starting with the sort of maxilla shape coming in here, and then probably coming way out to the side, and then that skull shape coming back. The zygomatic and into the maxilla, and then of course that's going to tell you a little bit of where that tooth is, because the tooth is right at the edge of the maxilla into the zygomatic. So you would have, again, some more More of those teeth, more of those fangs. Zygomatica there. And then, of course, you've got nasal passages here, and then our sort of eye structure here, which then goes into the zygomatic arch. Zygomatic bones. So again, yeah, having studied those bones now, I have a much better idea of what those shapes are doing. And it only took me, 45 minutes of a little bit of a study and doing some drawing, but I think in the end, totally worth it when you have the kind of confidence of knowing where it's going to go. And again, you do these things more often, you draw these skulls, you get to be an expert. And there's some really great creature designer artists. I think of Tara Whitlatch, who I had a chance to meet and have several of her books, and have watched a lot of her workshops and videos in years past, and I've watched her do what she does, and she is an expert in animal anatomy, especially in animal anatomy. I think she wanted to be a veterinarian or something first, and then decided she wanted to do more creativity. But she had all this knowledge and that she had studied in school and put it towards her art. So she used a lot of that knowledge in her profession as a concept designer, creature designer. And boy, does it pay off when you have that kind of knowledge. So definitely worth a little bit of study. Even if it's not just on this project, but on future projects, you have some expertise and stuff that will help you design. Part of what we do as artists, I think, for me, has always been turning things over. Asking questions, turning things over, learning. My father was a science person and a physics teacher, and always left me with the idea that ask good questions, let alone scientific method, which is all that same process of asking questions and setting up a problem and answering it. It all starts with good questions. And that means being curious about things, turning things over, looking at the world, asking questions. And that's what being an artist is. Investigation. It's not about all the hype and the image. I think the real artists are in the trenches researching. And that's why I think science and the arts have always and philosophy have always gone together, because we are in the business of researching life and answering questions and doing studies and learning how things work. Okay, so that gives me a little bit better of a structure for a skull. Again, this is just a base framework that I'm going to be doing some more loose sketching over the top, but worth a little bit of the investment now to learn how these structures come together. And even just in this hour of studying this skull and putting things together a little bit, I feel more confident, like I know where they're going. So whatever I end up doing, I'll have some idea what needs to be there underneath. All right. Maybe I'd see a little bit more underneath this head. I kind of drew the head a little bit down. The curvature of it would need to be more across. Subtle difference, but might need to see a little bit more of those inside of those structures. A little bit of cleanup on this guy too. So we got the 7 cervical vertebra, 12 thoracic, 7 lumbar, which would mean you have a total of 26 vertebra, and then the sacrum with maybe a floating rib somewhere off the back here. Again, helping me with bony landmarks, a little sense of the gesture, what this creature might do when it's walking. It's already looking a little more believable, so I think I'm just going to touch up a little bit on these bones. I don't want too much shading, as I might need the edges and the lines or to see them a little bit more clearly, so shading can work a little bit, but I don't want to make things difficult to see, so keeping a more linear drawing I think will help. Good morning, Super Spanx. Thanks for tuning in. You there? Anybody else out there visiting? Where are you hailing from? Thanks for joining me this morning. Ooh, all right. You might be my farthest visitor yet. I haven't been at this real long streaming, but Norway is the farthest I've reached so far, I guess. So thanks. And we're out here all the way on the left coast of the United States in California. So good to reach across to you. Must be pretty late. Yeah, I was just gonna say 5:30 there. Yeah, well it's 8:30 in the morning here. But like I was talking about a little bit earlier, I'm a dad, so I have to do this at weird hours when my kids are asleep. My kid. I was actually just overseas there. I was in Paris and in London about a week and a half ago, and we got through some of your hot spell, your warm summer. It must have been pretty hot in Norway too. I know in London it was warm, and Paris was smoldering. So just in case you're tuning in, we've been drawing this morning skeleton for a creature design. Did a little bit of a head study here to get basic structures for a feline skull. And now I'm applying some of those feline structure skulls to this full body skeleton. And again, this is all sort of preparatory work to be able to design something over the top of all this. So I don't know if I'm going to get to that this time. Probably in the next stream I'll work back over the top and start working up some more looser sketches and designs for a creature. But I wanted to take some time to do some study of structures underneath. So I was just putting the head back on to this body. Whoa, 30 Celsius, that's crazy. That's like, is that almost 100? That's got to be pretty close, because it was like 28 Celsius when we were there, and that was getting in the 90s, or what we would know to be Fahrenheit. But just for the people out here to know how hot that is, that's warm. Very warm. Just for your answer your question, I teach in an animation and game design program. I teach creature design, life drawing, background design, and little game prototyping. So my background is illustration and storytelling, but that's sort of the nature of where my teaching job is. And then of course I do freelance work on the side and various illustration projects. As a freelancer, yeah. How about you? What do you do? Yeah, well, it's not always easy. That's for sure. I suppose many years ago I foregoed making a lot more money doing something else in favor of something I'm more passionate and driven to do. Money's not everything, but it helps. Especially when you're a parent living in a very expensive place. Oh, nice. Do you program, or do you design, or are you a visual designer? User interface? UX? That's very busy work. You probably have a great work doing what you're doing. Oh, your own. Oh, that's cool. How's work going? Do you have a crew working with you, or are you working on your own? Nice. Back end or front end stuff? Oh, cool. But I just can't even believe how much like UI and UX and have really, really changed and blossomed. That's where it's at if you're doing software. I have several friends that I went to school with as visual designers who are doing exclusively that kind of work now for big companies and small companies, startups and larger companies that do big software, back end and front end too. Sweet. Yeah. Sorry, just cleaning up a little bit of my lumbar vertebra here. I realized last time when I finished this one, I had to depart rather suddenly. The family and the kid needed some help. That's why it's so early for me right now. My kid's asleep. Do you have kids? Very true, my friend. But my kid really likes doing creative projects. He gets so passionate and driven. It's amazing in such a young kid how much he's really excited and the focus he has. It's crazy. It reminds me of myself when I was young. Oh, cool. How old's your daughter? Young or teenager? I wanted a daughter when my wife and I were trying. My wife won. She wanted a boy. Oh, all right. Hey, congratulations then. On the way. That's great. That is great news. That is such a wonderful feeling. God, it'd almost make it worth doing again. Almost. It's a lot of work too, so get ready. Sleep now while you can. I didn't. People told me that too, and I was like, okay, I'll try, and I never did. And then the day that our son was born, we had literally been up all day and half of the night, and then she went into labor. No sleep for the weary. Good, good. Oh, I don't think I've slept the same because we sleep with our son, so we've tried to get him in his own bed, but he just wants to sleep with mom and dad. So I don't think I've had a great night's sleep since he was born, and it's been years now. So, oh my God, I'm just used to not sleeping now. I miss those days. So much rest. I wish I would have slept more, but by the time he came, it's too late. Game on. Well, congratulations. That's awesome. We've thought about maybe doing it again, but honestly, where we live, and I don't know what it's like in Norway, but where we live, it is like the most expensive place in the United States to live. And my wife's work is here, and so is mine, so we're kind of stuck in this place where we can't just move and live where it's cheaper to do what we do. we're in kind of specialized fields, so we're stuck in this city at least for a while. Yeah, I've always loved that expression. Sleep when you're dead. That's right. Life's too good and stuff to experience. You got plenty, plenty of time to sleep when your ashes are in the ground. So true, so true. But just, I think all I would really need would be like one good week of sleep, and I could be human again. Wow. Yeah, that's great. Oh, fantastic. That is fantastic. I tell you, man, I wish the states could figure out a way to go socialize socialized medicine, or at least partially, if not completely, partially. So if that's the route you wanted, you could go that route, or if you wanted your own, you could go that route too. But it's so expensive, and there's a lot of people taking risks, not not having insurances, and we've got a big homeless problem. And I always said I wouldn't get political on this stream, but that orange-headed baby has not done very great things for this country. And just know out there that there are many of us here that are not like that. Don't hold it against us. Although the last thing I'll say is, I have to say, the signs that our uh, London brothers and sisters, and now Scottish brothers and sisters, are putting up the good fight over there. I love the signs and the support. Hilarious. I hear you. Being thankful for what we have. You are totally right. It's kind of all about perspective, right? You are right, my friend. I'm going to put a little bit more shadow here on the ground, just to create a little sense of dimension. Not that a skeleton would cast much shadow, but a little bit of shadow. But mostly just a little bit of the illusion of some perspective. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time, again, shading bones. Just not worth the time when I'm going to be just using this as a base to draw over. So I think as long as I know where most of my forms are, I'll have some idea. All right. We've got a lot more little details in the phalanges and the tarsals and the metatarsals, but to be honest, such small little bone work that at this scale, as long as it sort of communicates the general idea, it's enough for me to be able to sketch over the top and work around. Oh, that was from last time, actually. I'm just kind of finishing a little bit of a drawing I'd started in my last stream. The 7C is the cervical vertebra, and then the 12 is the thoracic, and then 7 is the lumbar, and then the S is the sacrum. So I was, last time I got sort of in the middle of all this, I was realizing that most feline big cat animals have 13 ribs, but 12 thoracic vertebrae. So somewhere in there, one of the floating ribs either shares a vertebra, but there was sort of this division between how many they have. Humans have 24. It looks like most felines have 26 vertebra, so they have an extra 2, which I know horses do too, even though they have a lot of the same structures as humans and other mammals. So I was just giving myself a little reminder there. All right. Well, I think, I've been going here closing in on 2 hours. So I think for this stream, I'm going to leave it at this. And then I think my next one, I will draw probably over the top of this. I could keep going, and maybe I'll come back on here in a little bit, but I think I need to take a break, and this would be a good breaking point before going into just free sketching over the top of this skeleton. But at least this gives me a base to work from. I don't always do this for creature design, but it's a very good methodical approach when you're going to spend some time really designing a creature and potentially work in 3D with it, is to work on a skeleton. And if you alter the skeleton a little bit, you then alter the outside form. And so for me, this is just a base that I'm going to do a little bit more free sketching on. But I think for this stream, I'm gonna stop here and then pick it up and start sketching over the top the next time I come on. Maybe I'll come back on a little bit later. Maybe I'll come back a little bit later today, maybe this evening. Not real sure. A lot of it depends on how much time I have before either my son wakes up or my son goes to sleep, or how much time I really get dedicated to this. So, but I think for now, I'm going to sign off. And thanks, Super Spinks, for checking in from Norway. Really great to hear from you. Sorry you guys are catching so much heat out there. Hope you guys get some relief here in San Francisco, where we are at something like 62 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm not exactly sure what the Celsius translation is, but pretty mild right now. Pretty cool. It was a nice break for us, but that's common. Our summers are often cold here in the Bay Area on the peninsula. So, all right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next one. And again, I don't exactly know when, so you'll just have to check back in. Maybe I'll try and send out some alerts and messages letting people know that I'm streaming, and then they can come check back in. If you're a follower, it will let you know, so check me out. You can always follow me, and then it'll alert you when I'm going to come back on. And then you can also check out my work at TreyGallaher.com. You can check me out on Facebook at Art by Trey Gallaher on Facebook. And you can also catch me on Instagram at Trey Gallaher, no spaces, at Trey Gallaher. And Twitter, Trey Gallaher. And I don't know, what else do I got out there? Oh, YouTube. I guess you could check me on YouTube at Trey Gallaher. So yeah, I'm out there. And check out my website, check out my YouTube, check out me on Instagram, and drop me a line. Let me know if you're out there and what you do. All right, have a good morning, have a good rest of the day, stay passionate, and keep working on your stuff, and I'll see you next time.